My grandfather's favorite song was a song called Que Sera Sera, and it goes something like this. It's about a little girl who keeps on asking her mother about the future. And the mother's answer is always, the future is not ours to see. Whatever will be, will be. And he always used to listen to that song when he would go on a date with his girlfriend. His girlfriend was called Dot, by the way. And they would always listen to the song. But it always begs the question, can we know the future? Does Providence speak? When I was young, 14 years old, I was sitting at school one day. It was the exam season, it was the mid-year exams in June, which in South Africa is the winter. And I remember the classroom I was sitting in was on the, we call the ground floor, but what you call the first floor, near the gate of the school. And because it was exams, and I didn't have an exam in that session, that classroom became a study room. And in that study room, for some strange reason, I wrote the following poem. The Loneliness. He sat on the porch holding his drink. He gazed at the white wall with her picture. He gazed beyond that. He gazed beyond the horizon. He gazed beyond the universe. He gazed into emptiness, because there was no more cause for him to just stare at what was in front of him. He sat, but occasionally stood up to stretch or to fetch food. But he ate little and drank little. And he did not sleep for 3 days and for 3 nights. He was separated from the only thing that he lived for and loved. He had been separated by the barrier where only the spirits of the dead could dwell. Then the emptiness went, but the loneliness came. These 3 factors were the only things which could break and destroy the morale of a man and give him no more cause to live. To accompany the loneliness were the visions of her in her deathbed, dying. The painful death which was her fate. 5 more days he stayed in this state. After that came what would decide the rest of his life. But only people with a strong power could come out on top. The restoring came within the hour. Then an echo of beating and the weeping stopped. The changes started as his gazing came out of its blurriness and became sharp. When the echo stopped, someone was knocking at the door, and he had conquered mental instability. And when he opened the door, the fear and the loneliness were gone. Does Providence speak? You all know what happened to my wife. But I wrote this when I was 14 years old. How could I see the future? This book I've carried with me for 36 years. It's my high school yearbook, 1986. I lost it. I didn't know where it was. But every now and so often it would come up in my house. When my wife was diagnosed with cancer in 2020, I remember this poem. And I went to my house and I searched all over for this book and I could not find it. I tore my house apart searching for this poem because I remembered it. And I thought, did Providence speak? I could not find this book for 2 years. And I thought, maybe that's a good sign. But as Queenie got sicker and sicker, I continued to remember this poem and I continued to search. And I could not find it. But finally, 2 weeks before Queenie died, I was looking in my bookshelf for something else. And this book fell out. Queenie did not know of this poem. I never read this poem to her. She would have told me that I cursed her or something, probably. But does Providence speak? You see, I was 14 years old at the time when I wrote that poem. A vision of a man whose wife died in his arms. But how did I know at 14 years old what I would encounter when I was older? I didn't. And it's a question which I've asked myself a lot during Queenie's illness and since. I shared this poem with Doug, with Lester, with Joe, with a few other close friends. Trying to understand what was God's vision for my life. Because, to be honest, there were no angels singing, there were no choirs, this is no prophecy from God. God was not speaking to me. At that point in my life, I had not experienced anybody dying except my grandmother. And my grandmother also died at a young age. She was 56 years old. And she passed away quietly in her sleep. So even her death was peaceful and quiet. But does Providence speak? My second speech in Toastmasters was a speech called, How Then Shall You Live? It was given in 2014, and it was a question of knowing that our lives will end. How will we choose to live our lives? Knowing that our lives have a terminal point, how are we going to choose to live? Who knew that that was the answer, that we were living that answer all the time since then? And finally in 2020, before Queenie got sick, when I won the table topics contest, the question was, if you are in a dark place and you see a light, what does that light represent? And my answer, hope. You see, because in the darkness of all things, in all things there's darkness. But at that time I thought maybe hope is a good thing to look for. Does Providence speak? I look at all these things that have happened since Queenie got sick, and even before that, obviously, 36 years before. And I ask myself, what was God preparing me for? What was God trying to tell me? Was God trying to say, be strong, be ready? I don't know. I wasn't so wise, and I did not prepare myself like I should have. Towards the end, I tried. But it seems like God was reaching out from the very beginnings of my life into my life to tell me, you need to be ready for these things that come to you. I'm happy that Queenie was ready. As I've told you before, and as I shared with you before, Queenie was not afraid to die. And I believe that Queenie, even in her darkness, had hope. And I do believe that hope was God. Because I do believe in God, and I do believe God does give us signs and suggestions about the things that we should look for. But are we wise enough to hear them? And so the man standing here today has all these questions about why the boy wrote that poem. I don't have an answer. All I can leave you with is the question. Does Providence speak? Toastmasters.